All right, this talk is about tmux, or why you need a multiplexer. And before we get started, I'm curious, let's show of virtual hands. Who has used tmux before? All right, we got a few. That's not bad. So for those of you who haven't, I hope I haven't lost you on the very first slide. Let's talk about what a multiplexer is. So definitions on the screen, but at its core, multiplexing is combining multiple things into one. So here's a graphic. On the left-hand side, we see 5 signals. These are being multiplexed into a single signal. And then on the right-hand side, that signal is being demultiplexed back into 5. We don't care about demultiplexing for this talk, but I just thought the whole graphic was kind of interesting. And multiplexing is shortened to muxing sometimes, or even shorter, mux. And you'll see where that comes into play right now. So if we combine multiplexing plus a terminal, we end up with tmux. And this is a definition from the tmux man page. I'm going to wait a second, give people a chance to read this. So essentially, you can manage multiple terminals from a single place. I actually don't think their explanation is terribly compelling, so let's look at tmux in practice to see what we could use it for. So this is our terminal window. If you don't have tmux installed already, you could get it from wherever packages are sold near you. For me, that's Brew, but maybe it's apt, Yum, or Pacman. But let's be honest, if you're using Pacman as your package manager, you know what tmux is already. This command will start your first session, and that session is named my first session. That session is a key word of tmux. There's kind of 3 of them that we'll talk about today, and that's sessions, panes, and windows. So let's press enter and get started. So congrats, you are in your very first tmux session. All sessions will start with one window by default, and that one window will have one pane by default. This window behaves and looks a lot like a regular shell, but you might notice we have some additional fun stuff on the bottom. That fun stuff is the tmux status bar. Out of the box, it shows information about your current session, also has information about your system. So on the left-hand side, we see that we have a window in the 0 position. It is our active window. That's why it has an asterisk. And that active window is running ZSH as its process. On the right-hand side, we have the host name for this machine, the time and date. tmux actually has a configuration file that you can change what is in your status bar. And there's a fair amount of stuff I recommend that you do change, and we'll cover that later. But that's enough talking about tmux, and we can talk about my favorite topic, which is actually why I shoehorn this in. Talk about Vim. Now, I like to read the Vim man page before I go to bed every night. It kind of soothes me to sleep, and I think it helps me become a better programmer. But sometimes I want to multitask. Let's say I wanted to monitor my system while I was reading the Vim man. I can accomplish this by running a new pane in tmux. We can create that pane by running this command. So this is Control and B pressed at the same time with the modulus operator. This command tells tmux to open a new vertical pane. This is what that looks like. So panes are individual shells inside of the same window. The Vim man is still open. I can reference it when I need it, but I also have a new shell available that I can do with anything I want. So I said I wanted to monitor my system, so I'm going to run the command gotop, which is a kind of iteration of htop or top written in Go. With that, we have our 2 disparate tasks running in the same window. You're not only limited to vertical splits, however, you can also have a horizontal split. And the command for that is slightly different than the one we did before. So it's still Control and B pressed at the same time, but this time we're going to follow it with the double quotes. We press the combination and we get our new split below gotop. Now we can put something fun in this last terminal window. And fortune piped into Cowsay is always a very solid choice. And now our terminal is looking great. You're only limited by your monitor size. There's no limit to how many panes you could have open. So if you had a 50-inch monitor, you could make panes until cow, say, comes home. So I've referenced when you press Control and B at the same time. This is actually the tmux prefix. If you've used Vim before, it's a lot like the leader key. It's how you issue a command to tmux. From here on out, I'm not going to say Control and B. I'm just going to call it the prefix. And this notation where capital C dash symbol is used in programs like Vim and Emacs. It's just kind of like a shorthand. So with the help of some movie magic, we are looking at all of the same panes from before. They've just been cleared out. Now, talking about navigation, I actually don't think it's super intuitive how you can navigate around panes in tmux. You can do it with the prefix command, or with the prefix followed by an arrow key. And pay attention as we do this to that green border. It'll move around as we move our active pane. So right now, we are looking at the furthest left pane as our active one, and the long vertical line in between is all green. We do prefix right arrow, we will move our active pane to be the right one, and the border has moved with it. You see it's like half of that line, and now the bottom of that pane. If you want to move to the bottom, prefix down arrow. And once again, the border has moved. If you haven't noticed by now, though, tmux kind of has a lot of questionable default bindings, and I don't know. If you've talked to me at all, you know I don't care for arrow keys too much. My keyboard doesn't have dedicated arrow keys, so we can fix that. So if you wanted to close a pane, you could do so by using the exit command like you would in a regular shell. If you press enter, that pane goes away. Or you could use a more idiomatic method, like prefix followed by X. This is killing a pane in tmux. And you'll get a slight warning where tmux will ask you, hey, do you want to kill that pane? And you can say yes or no. In this case, we're going to say yes, and we're back down to one pane. Now, there will come a time where you don't want to work in panes. You actually will want to work in a new window. And you can think of windows like you do tabs in your browser. You can create a new one with prefix followed by C. And we're in a new window. It doesn't look like much has changed, but you can get an idea that something has if you look at the status bar. So we have our new window. We actually have it in the first position, and we see that that window has the asterisk, denoting it's our active window. And our old window has a hyphen, denoting that it is the previous window. Now's a good time to mention that tmux uses zero-based indexing for sessions, panes, and windows. So let's make it a little bit more obvious that we're looking at one window versus the next. So I'm going to run a fun command called neofetch, and that's just going to display information about my system. Now, I ask that you keep any comments about my uptime to yourself, whether you're impressed or disgusted. That's not what this talk is about. But let's say we want to go back to the first window. We actually have a few different options that we could use. The first is to do prefix followed by 0. So we're telling tmux to take us to the window at the 0th position. We could do prefix P to take us to the previous position, or whichever one had the hyphen. Or we could do prefix N to go to the next window. This one works because we're currently on the last window of our session, and the next window will wrap us all the way around to the first window. No matter which of those you pick, you're going to end up at your first window. And we know that's true because our 0th window has the asterisk. Okay, quick breather. Let's do a less contrived example. So I'm a front-end developer. I look at website most of the time, and I want to talk through what my website session looks like to give you an idea of how I'm kind of using tmux truly in my day-to-day. So I run about 4 windows on average in my website session. The first is for my Node client. The second is for my Node server. Third is for Vim. And the fourth one is actually a scratchpad. It's still Vim, but this is where I take notes about the task I'm working on. So if I have questions or if I want to write something down that I think is important, I can do it with just quickly switching to this new window. And I don't break my flow state because it's not that difficult to switch from my third window to my fourth. So it's important for me that I don't have to like break context. Now, you won't always be in the same session. You can detach from sessions. So we're back to my website session, and to detach from it, we could run prefix. Whoops, we could do prefix followed by D for detach. When we run that, we will get this. We'll know that we've detached successfully because we see the detach from session website message, and the session is actually still alive. All those instances of Node and Vim, they're still running in the background. And that's super useful when you have longer running tasks that you don't necessarily need to babysit. So if I'm running a suite of playwright tests, I'll detach from that playwright session and I'll go look at something else, and those tasks are still running in the background. That fact is what makes tmux super powerful when you're SSHing into a remote machine. So instead of losing everything when you disconnect from it, if you did all of your work in a tmux session, it would be saved for the next time you connected to the machine. Now, I don't do that too much, but what I do a fair amount is accidentally close my terminal window. And tmux has saved my bacon because I can just reattach to my session and all of my work is still right there. I haven't actually lost anything. So if we're not in tmux, we can attach to a session with this command. It's tmux a-t with whatever the session name is. In my case, it's website. And we're looking at our favorite website session again. If you didn't remember the name of the session, you could run tmux ls, and this will give you a list of all of your current sessions. I think this slide actually might be the most important in the talk because it shows how much I rely on tmux. So I have 9 sessions running, and if I didn't use tmux, this would probably be like 9 terminal windows, each with their own set of tabs to manage. That sounds like a nightmare. It also looks like a nightmare. Here's 9 terminal windows. I can't imagine my life before tmux, and I know there was a point in time where I didn't use it, but it sounds terrible because this looks awful. So now that you've seen what managing terminals looks like without tmux, let's take a look at what managing terminals looks like with tmux. So you don't have to detach from a session and attach to a new one. You can actually change sessions without ever leaving tmux. So back to website, we can run the prefix followed by s, and this will give us something that looks a lot like the tmux ls command. It's a list of my active sessions, but I can actually navigate to these and select one to attach to. So I have the ability to just type in a number. So if I wanted to go to the registration session, I could type the number 4, hit enter, and I'd be reattached, or I can manually navigate. And while I do that navigation, I can get a small preview of the different windows. So you see I have my Node clients and then Node server, and you can see a little bit of Vim in that last window. There are other ways to switch sessions. This is what I use probably 99% of the time, though. All right, home stretch. I mentioned you can customize different parts of tmux. This is the file that you do it in, .tmux.conf. Some things I would recommend changing is the prefix. Control and B are nowhere near each other on my keyboard, and it's a finger workout. I have my prefix bound to Control S. Control A is also a popular choice, but it's personal preference. Zero-based indexing makes a lot of sense if you're a programming language, but not when you're working with a keyboard. So 0 is not next to the 1 key, and that makes it kind of annoying. So I've rebound my panes, windows, and sessions to all be 1. So starting with 1 and 2, 3, so on. Using arrow keys for anything, gross. You should use HJKL whenever you can in life, even if you're not going to be a Vim user. And lastly, the status bar. I don't care about hardly any of that stuff. Stuff about my session is cool, but I don't care about the host name for my computer. I have a clock somewhere else, and I don't need to know the date. You can make that totally empty, or you can do what I do and just leave yourself fun messages. So I have a reminder that says, like, drink more water, because I'll look at that every once in a while, and it serves as a good reminder. If you're looking for inspiration for your tmux configuration, you could do a lot worse than going to Thoughtbot's tmux.files and just blatantly copying them. They are a design and development consultancy out of Boston. They have a lot of awesome open source work, and any program that they provide .files for are pretty sensible choices that it's easy to recommend. If you happen to trust me for some reason, you could look at my dot files. I'm not super great at keeping them up to date, but it gives you an idea of the kind of things that are important to me in tmux. All right, you don't have to use tmux for just managing your sessions and whatnot. You can also kind of use it as like a pseudo window manager replacement, as long as all the windows are terminals. I'm only slightly too ashamed that I got into tmux by ricing my Unix setup. So before I used the tiling window manager, I used tmux to do stuff. This is a picture that I had in 2018. It's a file manager, Slack, a music player, Hacker News, and HTOP, because of course I'm running HTOP all the time. I felt super cool when I took this picture and I posted it to Reddit. So you can use tmux to take leet Unix photos. Some additional resources are the tmux man page. That kind of goes for every program you use in the terminal. You should read the man page. It's like you can learn a lot, and it's also just like kind of a good habit to get into. I was only half joking when I talked about reading the man page before bed. I don't do it daily, but when I do, I end up learning something. There's a good book by Brian Hogan called tmux 2, Productive Mouse-Free Development. The major version of tmux is actually 3 now, but I have this book. It's still a very solid reference. Not much has changed. Lastly, Thoughtbot is that consultancy I mentioned a second ago. They have a course on tmux that is totally free and talks about beginning to end, like installing it all the way to some pretty advanced topics. So it's a really great resource if you want to take this a step further. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any.